Buenas tardes. Bona tarda a tothom. Gracias por estar aquí. Esta actividad que presentamos hoy está incluida dentro de la exposición WordPress Photo en Barcelona. Es fruto de la colaboración entre Fotografías Individuales y CASA SEAT, así que muchísimas gracias a todo el equipo de CASA SEAT por acogernos esta tarde aquí. WordPress Photo es el concurso de fotografía documental más reconocido del mundo, que defiende el poder de la fotografía y la importancia del acceso a historias visuales de gran calidad, mostrando una amplia visión de todos los retos que tenemos en esta sociedad global, más allá de las noticias que vemos en los titulares de actualidad. Desde la Fundación Photographic llevamos 19 años trayendo aquí en Barcelona la exposición, y eso es gracias a la colaboración de Banc Sabadell y también la coproducción del Centro de Cultura Contemporánea de Barcelona. Así que si todavía no habéis visitado la exposición, podéis ir hasta el 17 de diciembre. Por favor, id. Photographic Social Vision, para los que no nos conozcáis, llevamos más de 2 décadas defendiendo el poder de la fotografía documental como herramienta para comprender el mundo, pero también para generar cambio social o transformación. ¿Qué hacemos ahí? Muy brevemente, hacemos actividades como las de hoy, exposiciones dirigidas al público en general, pero sobre todo con el objetivo de sensibilizar y tomar conciencia. Representamos 10 archivos de fotógrafos y fotógrafas y todo su legado, y ofrecemos asesoramiento y soporte a la creación profesional con becas y premios. Yo me llamo Mireia Plans, vengo de la área de educación de Photographic Social Vision, desde donde creemos que la fotografía tiene un poder enorme de transformación personal y social, y desde allí creamos proyectos de fotografía participativa. Entregamos cámaras a las personas para que nos cuenten su realidad en primera persona. También preparamos actividades de educación visual para jóvenes, para gente mayor, y también estamos formando a profesionales. Dicho esto, como introducción súper breve, hoy tenemos la oportunidad de hablar de fotografía y salud mental y cómo la fotografía puede combatir prejuicios y, sobre todo, generar un impacto positivo en la sociedad. Y para ello, le doy tiempo a que te traduzcan. Tengo el gran honor de presentaros hoy a Lee-Ann Olwage, fotógrafa sudafricana, ganadora del premio WordPress Photo de este año, la categoría de fotografías individuales de la región de África. Ella hoy nos presentará su proyecto El Gran Olvido. Es un proyecto personal en el que explica cómo tratar la demencia, cómo se trata la demencia a lo largo del continente africano. Thank you for being here. Gracias por estar aquí. Para los que no conozcáis, Lee-Ann es reportera visual sudafricana que usa la narración colaborativa para explicar historias de temas relacionados con el género y la identidad. Lee-Ann entiende la fotografía como un modo de co-creación y celebración. Sus proyectos siempre son a largo plazo y pretenden crear un espacio donde las personas participen de esta co-creación y que sientan también que estas historias les representan de una manera reafirmante y festiva. No os puedo leer todo su currículum, sería como 1 hora y media. Brevemente, Lee-Ann forma parte de Native, que es un colectivo de narradoras visuales que proceden de regiones y comunidades poco representadas. Forma parte de Woman Photograph, es un catálogo de mujeres independientes y fotógrafas no binarias que trabajan para difundir las voces de los reporteros de todo el mundo. Los premios son infinitos, pero para destacaros que aparte del WordPress Photo de este año, también ganó WordPress Photo en 2020. Tengo aquí el Sony Award Photography 2023, también lo ha ganado este año. Ha ganado Contemporary African Photography en 2022, el This is Gender en 2021 y el Pride Photo Award 2021 también. Os digo, es nada, le pido un resumen de los premios más destacados. Lee-Ann, muchísimas gracias por venir. Cuéntanos sobre este proyecto que nos presentas hoy, El Gran Olvido.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank World Press Photo and the incredible team from the foundation for inviting me. Thank you to the audience for being here, for being interested in this very, very special project. I'm amazed at how many people came here tonight. And then a big thank you to my partner, who's always been very supportive of my work, and my family, who, when I quit a very good job and told them I'm going to be a storyteller, I think they thought I was crazy, but they said go for it anyway. So I'm very grateful to be here. Before I can tell you this story, I'm going to tell you another story first. So my father had an incredible life, and a few years after he retired, he lost the ability to walk. And this was a big mystery to us. So it came out of the blue, and we went to the doctor to find out what's going on. So the doctor is the expert here. The doctor in this story is the storyteller. He's the person we trust because he's the expert. The doctor gave us a diagnosis, and we needed this. We needed to believe something to make sense of the way our world was changing. We needed to understand how this man who was the foundation of our family all of a sudden could not move in his own body anymore. And so after we got a diagnosis, we felt really good about it, and we understood it. We could make sense of the world again. And then many years later, we got a second opinion, and we realized that the first diagnosis was completely wrong, and that if we got a second opinion and we got somebody to help us sooner, they could have given him the ability to walk again. So the reason I'm telling you this is that we as photographers, we as storytellers or journalists, what we create and what we put out into the world, there's a level of trust. You trust us. You read the news or you read stories, and that becomes the foundation of how you understand the world and how we experience the world. This becomes the way we learn about other cultures and communities. And therefore, this comes as a really big responsibility. And as somebody who's incredibly shy, I always find it amazing how people give us access to their worlds. They give us this trust to tell their stories. I'm always blown away by that. And because of that, we become the guardians of these stories. So I am the guardian of this story, and tonight I will share it with you. And I ask that you treat it with as much care as I do, and that you are open to learning, and that maybe you get some insight into a different way of seeing. So The Big Forget is a project I've been working on over the last 3 years. I've done work in Namibia, Ghana, and Madagascar. It's a long-term project, and only after 3 years I feel like I'm actually finding the language to tell the story. So I almost feel like it's just the beginning now. And I love that. I love spending a lot of time on a project and really understanding the subject matter, because the reality is that this is a community that I'm not a part of. And as a storyteller, you know, there's this idea that as journalists, we are the experts on the topic, which is nonsense. We are the person in the room that knows the least. And if you are going to tell somebody's story, you need to understand that at best you might tell a small portion of their story through your lens. So it's important to acknowledge your role as the storyteller. It's important to really know that when you start a project, you can lay a foundation, but you should be very, very willing to throw your ideas out the window and to listen, to learn, and to allow the story to tell itself, to be a vessel and a vehicle for that. So when we think about aging and forgetting, who here can remember the name of their first boyfriend or girlfriend? Show me your hand. Yeah. Okay, a few. And how many people can remember the name of their first pet, cat or dog? Not okay. That's better. What did you eat last week, Friday? Can anybody remember?
Oof, no.
It's okay. You know, forgetting is a normal part of aging, right? The way we think about aging is that we're realizing that globally we are living longer. and we are forgetting more. According to the WHO, around 55 million people have been diagnosed with dementia, and every year we have 10 million new cases. And because this is becoming a global concern, more research is being done. We're looking for cure, and that's really great. But the one thing that's largely overlooked is how different communities perceive dementia. So how do we support different communities, and how do we learn how different communities interpret these symptoms? So when we think about the global conversation around aging, Africa is often overlooked because there's the belief that the population is not living as long. This is actually not correct. People are living longer, and people are showing the signs and symptoms of dementia. So when we think about the symptoms of dementia, these symptoms are often difficult to explain. Sometimes somebody will speak about their parents who have been dead for years as if they can see them. They might lose their inhibitions, their everyday activities become harder to complete. And we understand these symptoms because we have some knowledge of what is going on in the brain. But in many communities in Africa, the belief in the spiritual is as important as the belief in the physical. And the belief in superstition and witchcraft is a way to make sense of things we don't understand and things we can't see. And when we talk about mental health, it's such a difficult thing because there's a whole landscape that is invisible. And many communities do not understand what is happening. And so the belief in witchcraft becomes a dangerous thing when there's stigma and fear attached to it. And so what I found was, in this journey of understanding how people perceive dementia, I first went to Namibia, and I'll take you with me in a few moments, but first I'll take you to Ghana, to the witch camps, where I spent some time. And Ghana is the only country in the world that has these official witch camps where people get sent to live in isolation. The people I met there were predominantly women, I would say about 95%. And we'll talk about gender and witchcraft accusations in a minute. But what I saw was women displaying symptoms of dementia, symptoms of menopause, and then also mental health problems. And so when I first got to the camp, I was confused because I imagined that a camp full of witches would be very far out of the town. And so we drove, and the local collaborator stopped the car, and he said, "Well, we're here." And I said, "But we're in the village, everybody's around us." And the camp was started about 100 years ago, and it was very far from the center of the community, but slowly Gambaga swallowed the camp. And so I entered the camp where the belief was that the chief would take these powers from the women, that they would no longer be feared by the community. But what I also saw was women who were removed from their families and were living in these huts all alone, searching for safety. Some were sent there through a tradition where a chicken is thrown up into the air, and depending on the way it falls, if it falls with its chest up, you are accused of superstitious beliefs, and if it falls flat, you are safe. But some women also fled there because they feared for their lives and they were looking for safety. So when we think about stigma when it comes to mental health, this is something we see all over the world. We see it in Europe, we see it in America, and we see it in communities in Africa. Stigma is a universal theme that we can all relate to, and in these communities it's seen and perceived differently. And these women go to these camps, and often many of them don't see their families again. One of my favorite moments was meeting Kondu, who you see on the screen. I first met her on my first trip to Ghana. And there was this amazing moment where she was wearing this Beatles T-shirt for all the photographs, and she left for a moment, and she came back in this incredibly beautiful dress. And I was just blown away by this awareness of how she wanted to be portrayed, how she wanted her image to be shown. And this kind of came back to the theme of collaboration, which has always been very important in my work and which was very challenging when it came to working with people living with dementia. And it was such a firm reminder of how we want to be shown in a way that is beautiful. And I think that's the big problem with stories being told in many communities in Africa, is that it's not a story about villains and heroes. It should be a story where people are the heroes of their own story, you know. And this was one of those moments where she took ownership of that and of her image. And I always think about that fondly. And then when I made my second trip to Ghana, she was actually reintegrated back into her community. So there was something called the Go Home Project happening, where the volunteers running the camp worked very closely with the community. They work with doctors, with traditional healers, with spiritual healers, and they then work with the community to explain what is happening on a physical level, on a brain level, but also on a spiritual level. And she was one of the few women that got to go back home after spending many, many years in the camp. Tanjun has been in the camp for about 20 years, and she's still living there. And like many other women, she will never get the opportunity to go home. And for her, I guess in some ways it's a better life, but in other ways, this fear and stigma attached to dementia and mental health is something that a lot of work needs to be done on. And then when we talk about the spiritual world, I think it's very important to understand that the belief in the supernatural forms the foundation of everyday life in many communities in Africa and in many communities all over the world. So it is a way to explain the unexplained. When there's a death in the family, when there's drought, when there's bad weather, when the crops don't grow, all of these things are because of witchcraft. So therefore, it's also a way to explain something like natural disasters, but also those things that happen in the body. So when we think about disease, we have to understand that it has both a physical and a spiritual cause. So therefore, where do people go? I became curious, where do people go to find answers about what is happening? And what I saw was this incredible meeting of doctors and nurses, of traditional healers, of faith healers, because healing and disease is not linear. You know, there's this incredible spiritual plane that we can't see, but that exists. And what I realized was that these traditional healers could play a really important role in helping to identify people living with dementia. So when we think about the global plan in terms of how to support communities, we cannot leave traditional healers and faith healers out of the conversation. And this is a price list for different consultations. So if you have a problem with the court, maybe you steal something, this man can sort it out for you. Maybe you need some fertility luck. And then there's also mental illness, which you'll see at the bottom left is about 13,000 Namibian dollar. This is about the equivalent of 875 euros. So you can see mental health is an extremely expensive thing to deal with. But then traditional healers are more acceptable because you can pay with cattle for your consultation, where when you go to a Western-style hospital, you have to pay with money. So it's so important to understand how different communities deal with disease and what they need to be supported. This is Dr. Patrick. He's the head of the Traditional Healers Association in Namibia. And he has a mix of herbal remedies, and then he also works in consultation with the spirits. And he has many people coming to him to talk about these symptoms. So what is important to acknowledge is the role of language. So I'm incredibly grateful to Janine for translating tonight so that you can hear me speak in your own language. But let's talk about language and dementia. In many communities in Africa, there's no word for dementia. So words like confusion may be used. In French-speaking countries, the word for dementia means demented. So immediately there's a negative connotation. So if language is failing a diagnosis of somebody, how can people begin to find a way to support them, to understand what is happening? And the name The Big Forget came from speaking to Muriel from Madagascar and asking her, well, if you have no word, how do you describe this disease? And she was quiet for a long time and she said, it's like the biggest forget that can happen. And that was, for me, that was such a wow moment because it's such a loss of everything that makes somebody who they are when you forget. These are different traditional remedies used by traditional healers and also faith healers. And these will be used in different consultations. Some of the herbs are put in a pot and the water is boiled. Some are consumed, some are sprinkled around the home. So these are some of the ways that confusion is treated. And then this is Pastor Romanos. He's a faith healer. And he works closely with the local community for different kinds of healing, ranging from high blood pressure to different diseases that he sees, and then also seeing a lot of people who come there for confusion. And this is Ngenya. She was prayed for by Pastor Romanos, and then he made a mixture of holy salt and water and ash, and he performs a ritual where he washes her in attempt to heal her. So this is Gina, and Gina is actually the start of this whole story. In 2019, my partner told me about a newspaper article that he read about a woman from the Himba community in Namibia who was chained for 20 years in her village because people feared her and they didn't understand what was happening to her. She was later found by Barry Holzhausen from Alzheimer's Dementia Namibia, who did a screening and said that based on her symptoms, she's probably living with dementia. And he trained carers to care for her in her own community for about a year and a half. But unfortunately, after 20 years, the stigma and the fear of this woman was so strong that they decided to move her into a care home for her own safety. And I heard about her story and I decided that I needed to go and find her and meet her, but also meet her family to hear from their perspective how they perceived her symptoms. And so it was 2020, it was the pandemic, so all borders were closed. And in October of 2020, my partner and I heard a rumor that the South African border to Namibia was going to open. So we got in our car and we drove to the border and we waited and waited. And we got news that the next morning that would be open. So at 7 o'clock we were there, we did the border crossing. A few hours later, the borders, of course, closed again, and we decided that this was it. This was our one chance. We took the South African number plates off the car, and we just drove into the bush and on the back roads, and just decided that we needed to find Gina, and we needed to find what this was all about. So we met Gina in her care home where she's living now, and then we went to Ipupa Falls to meet with her brother, who is the king of the Himba. And he told us many stories of how children feared her, of how she was in chains for a very long time. And they even offered to show us other people who were still chained up. And this was such a strange moment for me as a storyteller, because it was kind of like, here's the story, and I didn't want to photograph it. I didn't want to photograph people being chained up, because I think we've seen enough of that. So I needed to find another way to tell this story. And I left very confused. I spent some more time with many families in Namibia, trying to understand how to visualize the story. Because the biggest problem for me in photographing people in a moment of weakness and vulnerability is that then becomes the visual that I put out into the world. And I needed to find a way to show a solution to this, but that was coming from the very community that I was meeting. So I spent a lot of time with Gina in the care home where she's living and where she's being cared for. And this is a very rare situation. In most of the countries I've visited in Africa, there are no formal care homes. And it's so different to the way that my family and my community deals with caring, where our lives are too busy. We just don't have the time to care for our aging parents. So we find a place where they can be cared for. And this is something that I never saw again. But I was amazed at what else I discovered as I searched for more families and to find out what is happening in different parts of the continent. And although Gina is safe and happy, she's still very far from the community where she spent her lifetime growing up. This is Titus Ihemba, who's also living in the same care home, who was attacked by men in his community. They beat him with a stick. And he's also showing symptoms of dementia, which in his community is still being misunderstood. And there's this belief that it is coming from witchcraft. And then this is the very different story. This is Ahune, who is cared for by only one of her daughters. And the rest of her family have decided to separate themselves from her. So a lot of people living with dementia are being ostracized, and if they are lucky, they are being cared for by a family member. What is interesting is that if they are being cared for a family member, it will always be a young woman. So there's a very gendered aspect to caring as well, where it always comes down to women doing the work. And then this is Johanna, and Johanna's in a very ideal situation where she's cared for at home by her husband, and he's also employed a daytime carer just to help with the day-to-day management. And this for somebody living with dementia is the most ideal because they're in familiar surroundings which help to trigger memory. She's supported by the people she loves, by a familiar environment. And this is her loving husband who took care of her for the first couple of years and then got some support from his sons who can afford to employ a carer. But this, again, is a very rare situation. And then this is my favorite story. This is Kahimbi. And when Kahimbi first started forgetting, his son Ivan went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "It's okay, don't worry, this is normal, she's just getting old." And then one day she forgot him, and he knew that something was wrong. And so he did more research, and he found somebody who could help him to understand what was happening to his mother. And he then got Alzheimer's Dementia Namibia to educate the entire village about what is happening. So there's no longer any fear attached to her symptoms, and everybody in the community helps to take care of her. So extended family cook for her. They make sure that she's always safe, she's always dressed and taken care of. And she loves collecting firewood, so she would often wander outside of the village, and even the neighbors would always make sure that she gets home safe. So this is a really ideal situation where we can see that with education and with empowerment, an entire community can become part of the support system of somebody who is living with dementia. And this is the hut where she sleeps with her granddaughters. So this is Andreas from Namibia. He's a nursing student. And he realized that a lot of people in his community will never get the opportunity to visit a doctor to get a formal diagnosis. So he adapted the 10 warning signs of dementia. And I love how he covered it in plastic, and he's preserving this piece of paper from Alzheimer's Disease International. And he goes around many rural communities to help screen people who might be displaying symptoms of dementia. But he took it one step further. So when you suspect that your parent may have Alzheimer's, you go to the doctor, and there's an international standard questionnaire. And he took this and he adapted it to his own community. So instead of asking, well, when your mother goes to the grocery store, does she get lost? He'll say, when your mom goes down to the river to fetch water, can she find her way home? And he made it specific to his community, to his language, to things that are relatable. And this is where I realized that these local heroes will be the ones to really bridge the gap between honoring their own culture, because Andreas shares the same belief system as his community, but he also has medical knowledge, so he is in a position where he's able to impart that. And that's always better. You know, when you have an outsider coming and saying what you believe is wrong, or the way you're doing this is wrong, that's not a way to do it, and it's none of that person's business anyway. You need to honor cultural beliefs, and you need to find those people in the community that are willing to do the work, and they need to be supported in a global plan to make lives better for people living with dementia. And this is him with his mom, Frank Hilde. And then this is the latest chapter in Madagascar. And in Madagascar, I found an incredible organization called Masondre Modi, run by Muriel and her mom, Yolanda. Yolanda's mom, Muriel's grandmother, also had Alzheimer's. And Madagascar is known as the island of witches, so the belief in witchcraft is very strong. And at the time, in the 80s, there was absolutely no information about what was happening to her. And only after her death did the family fully understand what was happening to Muriel's grandmother. And this inspired them to start the association. And they are now educating different families on how to care for their family member. They have this incredible belief that we are because of our parents. So in Madagascar, you don't find any care homes. Caring is done at home. But what the organization does provide is relief for family members. So they have a day center where you can take your parents so you can have a break. And in that way, I just saw another beautiful way that local heroes are supporting communities in their journey to understand what is happening and to support the elderly. What's really fantastic is it's so important for Dada Paul to still be involved in some household chores. So this is his thing, is cleaning the fish on Sunday. And, you know, that's the thing is, as people get older, we push them out of our lives and out of society because all of a sudden we treat them like they don't have any more value. And it's so important to make them a part of life, of family, of this structure. And that's where I think the belief that we are because of our parents is something that really resonates, is that, you know, we're so connected. The Native American Indians, the First Nation people, they believe, they don't fear dementia. They look at it as a natural progression. You are a child and you become an adult and you become a child again. And that's absolutely okay. There's a peace from that where I think we often fear all these things that we don't understand. And I've learned so much from different communities in how to understand these things. And just as a closing remark, my own father was diagnosed with a very aggressive case of dementia this year. And as a photographer, so much of what we do is to immortalize these moments in history, these brief moments of interaction between ourselves and the world. And for me, I guess it's a way to hold on to that. And I guess a big part of me fears that one day I will forget too. So for me, to tell these stories is a way to hold on to the way I experience life and the incredible people that I get to meet. Yeah, thank you.
Lee-Ann, ¿podrías decir que haces fotos para no olvidar también tú?
I do. I look at photography as this incredible dance with life where I get to experience all aspects of it. I get to experience all the joy and all the pain and everything in between and all these things that make us human. So for me, it really is a way to hold on to life because I feel like it's passing so quickly.
It is. Hablas al inicio que la fotografía se basa en un pacto de confianza. Cuando fotografías a alguien con demencia, ¿cómo consigues tener la noción de consentimiento? Que la otra persona está de acuerdo en darte su imagen.
So this has been something that I've really struggled with because all of my prior projects have been extremely collaborative, where there's always been incredible conversations of shaping the world, of returning to the work and developing it together. And then working on this project for the first time, I couldn't do that. I couldn't show the images to the people and talk about it and ask them, you know, how do you feel about your picture? How can we work on this together? And this was something I really struggled with. And I think that photography is such a dishonest medium because the photographer can make a picture look like anything that they want to. The one thing photography cannot lie about is the way the person in front of the lens feels about the photographer. It's always so obvious in the gaze, in the way that person looks back about how they felt about the photographer in that moment that you made the image. And to me, whether you can understand each other through language or feeling, that is where there was something that happened where I would spend time with people and sometimes it would not feel okay and I would put the camera away. I think there are more pictures that I haven't made than ones that I have. It's just a feeling.
¿Y cómo sucede luego el hecho de la colaboración, de trabajar en colaboración con la gente que les tomas fotografías? ¿Cómo consigues este juego?
When I think about the other projects that I've done, I think when I started as a photographer, I came from a very naive place where I thought I was gonna change the world and I was gonna tell people stories. And I very quickly realized that I was really just telling such a small portion of their story, you know. And for me, the moment this really clicked was I was working on a project about drag queen beauty pageants. And I had this idea of using quite a hard light to play with the masculine and the feminine. And so after every pageant, the drag artists would send me a message and say, can I please have my pictures? And it became this enormous amount of admin where I would send all of the photographs. But what happened was, and drag queens are really, like, they're so honest. It was great. There was this wonderful moment where somebody said to me, I really don't like my picture. I want to look beautiful. And I went, shit, I've done it completely wrong, you know? I'm not getting it.
Yeah.
And I completely changed my approach. And that for me was such a aha moment of how people wanted to be shown. It was the same with Kondu, who wanted to wear that beautiful dress for her image. You know, that was like, it was just such a firm reminder of our own ideas as storytellers are so limited and you really have to listen.
Al otro. Hay muchas imágenes que tenemos como en la ganadora Wolpers Photo, una persona mirando a cámara. No sé si son fórmulas para retratar a todas estas heroínas, sean mujeres que ven en los campos, líderes, activistas, enfermeras.
I think I always gravitate towards making the person that I'm photographing the hero. And this image, I always think of it as a happy accident, where it was my second trip. The first trip to the camps, I felt like I failed horribly. I was given this incredible grant and I went, but I just feel like I never got it. It just felt like I failed in a big way. And I was very lucky to get a second opportunity to go back to find a second funder. And the whole time I was there, I kept thinking, how do I visualize this world, this camp where so many women have passed through? How do I visualize the spiritual world? And it was the last day we got in the car and we were leaving, and I still feel like I didn't get it. And I had this moment where I said, stop the car. And I went back inside, and Sukhri was sitting there. Sukhri is one of the 5 leaders, because there are women from different tribes at the camp. And she was sitting there, and I just had this idea of creating this long exposure, and I didn't have a tripod, so I went down onto my knees and I sat very still, holding the camera, asking the other woman to walk around her to create this moment of what was happening inside her mind. And it worked perfectly, and I feel like I was very lucky that I finally found a visual way to tell the story.
Yo imagino fotografiar las problemáticas de salud mental, que es algo que sucede dentro del cerebro de una persona, que es muy difícil de ver desde fuera, si no es que vemos los efectos que generan las problemáticas. Es un gran reto como fotógrafa centrarte en fotografiar la demencia. ¿Cómo lo consigues? ¿Cómo exploras desde la fotografía fotografiar algo que es invisible?
I think it took me a really long time. Like I said, only after about 3 years, I really felt like, this is it. Now I'm developing a language. And I think that's important, to really spend time to understand the subject matter that you are taking on. But I also think photography is such a relatable medium. It crosses all boundaries of language, of culture. So I think it's something that anybody can look at and they can understand a picture. And that to me is such a wonderful thing. It's such a wonderful way to communicate.
Yeah. Muchas veces en los proyectos que hacemos, pienso ahora en material sensible, por ejemplo, que tratamos con personas que han sufrido abusos sexuales en la infancia, jamás preguntamos qué es lo que te sucedió. Incluso hay una participante que dice, lo que me pasó físicamente es lo de menos. Son los efectos de todo lo que sufrí. Y desde allí trabajamos mucho con el poder metafórico de la imagen, ¿no? El hecho de cómo esta imagen que has generado y que ha ganado el World Press Photo, como esta capacidad que tiene la fotografía de crear metáforas visuales. Pero tiene otra capacidad, que es la de emocionar. ¿Cómo funciona para ti todo esto, el tema de la emoción? ¿Cómo llegas a impactar con tus imágenes y también cómo tus imágenes impactan a la comunidad a la que fotografías? ¿Cómo consigues todo este vaivén?
So I always think about audience, and it's obviously an incredible privilege to be here tonight with all of you. But I always think the most important audience is the one where you create the work, and how do you take it back there? How do you have impact? So it's always very important for me to work with if I'm working with a local organization, to make sure that they have access to the images to try and show the work, to exhibit it in the community if possible, to take it back to where the story is, because that's really where the impact is needed.
Yeah. Voy a abrir las preguntas del público, porque yo aquí me estaría horas y horas hablando con Lee-Ann. Entiendo que también tratando de esta problemática en la que la educación comunitaria sobre demencia es muy importante, como has dicho tú, ¿no? Respetar las creencias de la gente a la vez que trabajar en pro de la salud mental. ¿Cómo es este equilibrio tan fino entre cultura, creencia, concienciación de la enfermedad y también generar nuevos hábitos de cuidado? ¿Cómo es esta fina línea? Supongo que hay proyectos de éxito, nos has enseñado, como Go Home Project, ¿no? Pero cómo funciona cuando todo esto está alineado, y supongo que se puede romper el estigma en cierta manera, ¿no?
I think for me, the next step with this work would be to move into the realm of activism, where I'd love to partner with the WHO, with Alzheimer's Disease International, because globally there's this urgency to support people living with dementia, and I think it's so important to include cultural perceptions, to include the way that those communities need support, because let's be honest, even if we do find a cure, chances of it getting to a tiny village in Ghana, really not that great. And I think that's why it's so important to work with local heroes, with national health plans, and to not forget about these communities, to understand that fine line that you talk about between culture and medicine and the spiritual and the physical. You know, I find it so relatable to think about disease having a spiritual cause and a physical cause. You know, when I think about mental health, when I think about my own struggles with mental health over the years, this is something that makes sense to me, is that there's more to it than just the physical. And to honor and respect that belief makes sense to me. And yeah, I think these communities have all the tools, they just need a little bit more support.
Pienso también que cada comunidad necesita una aproximación distinta, con unos problemas distintos. Tú has trabajado a lo largo de África con el tema de la demencia, y supongo que has podido detectar distintas formas de tratar la demencia, ¿no? Como nos decías, has estado en Madagascar, en Ghana, en Namibia, ¿no? Son distintas aproximaciones y distintas respuestas a una misma problemática global, las que te has encontrado.
Many of the beliefs are the same. But what I've seen is that across the board, lack of access to specialists, having a brain scan is nearly impossible. So there are lots of similarities, and many communities share very similar belief systems. So there's been a lot of similarities in what I saw. But of course, every community is unique.
Diferencias. Yo no sé si tenéis alguna pregunta a hacerle, Lee-Ann, aprovechando que está aquí. Abro la invitación para preguntarle. Bueno, tenemos un micro que va dando vueltas, solo os tenéis que levantar la mano y vendrán a dejaros el micro. Lee-Ann, ¿has pensado en continuar el proyecto en una segunda parte, no sé, quizá utilizar otro tipo de narrativas, no solo la fotografía, ya que en WordPress Photo están las narrativas abiertas, el vídeo, metodologías participativas? No sé, ¿has pensado en la continuación de todo esto?
Yes, I love this question. So in terms of other chapters, there's still a lot of work that I want to do, but I'm also very interested in creating portraits and printing them and asking the people living with dementia to work on the images, whether it's with paint or crayons. I'm so curious about how they see their mental landscape. So to find a way to maybe work with them collaboratively to do that is something I would love to try. And
¿en qué técnicas estás pensando?
I think working with your own image is incredibly therapeutic. So I love making portraits. To me, that would be the first way to go, and then to add visual elements to see how they use those. But also for their family members, I think it would be interesting to ask them to take this image and to, whether it's with paint or drawing or adding text to it, how they see their family member.
De hecho, aquí se hace muchísimo trabajo en fototerapia y personas que sufren Alzheimer, buscando el material de archivo y trabajando sobre el recuerdo, ¿no? Sobre resignificar el recuerdo y la emoción vinculada a ella. Sería muy lindo verte cómo evolucionar el proyecto y darle una vuelta. Mira, una pregunta.
I love that.
Nos animamos y a ver si alguien me sigue también. Al menos aquí en España, y diría que en buena parte de Europa, el tema de la salud mental ha sido siempre algo que ha estado como escondido. hasta hace muy poco no se han comenzado a hacer campañas para que la gente lo tenga más presente y trate de imbricarlo dentro de la comunidad, como tú decías, o sea, de que sea un problema de todos de alguna manera y así podemos encontrar una solución entre todos. No sé si crees que, o sea, creo que aunque estemos en ese punto, siempre piensas que la salud mental, un problema de salud mental, un trastorno, es algo que le pasa a otros, que no te va a pasar a ti. No sé si a través de la fotografía crees que es más fácil que haya esa conexión, o sea, esa empatía con que te puedas ver reflejado y puedas pensar en ello de manera personal.
Absolutely. I think, stigma and aging it's such a universal theme. Our own parents get older, and as we get older, we also question our own mortality. And when we talk about mental health, it's so important to create conversations, to have these images, to have these stories out in the world. And the more we do it, the more open and the more easy the conversation becomes.
No sé si hay alguna pregunta más que queráis plantearle a Lee-Ann. Mira, aquí tenemos otra y aquí otra. Dos.
Hi. Can you listen? I don't know if you see me. But
Yeah, see you. Hi.
I was wondering if you had another example of a healing process that you witnessed besides the one that you showed in the photograph.
Of healing, like healing rituals?
Yeah, healing rituals.
Yes. So the one I showed was the faith healer, but then if you visit a traditional healer in the ceremony, for instance, Ruben Chikumbio, let me see if I can find him. He was sitting with this metal trunk where he has a mirror and a plate that he uses for consultation with the spirits. So that was another ceremony that I witnessed. I was asked not to photograph it, and it was his way of providing healing for the person he was seeing.
Okay. We have another. Tenemos otra pregunta por ahí, creo. Sí, tú también. A ver, por aquí. Aquí. El lector.
Hi. Thank you for sharing your project. Yeah, I was wondering, you spoke, if I understood you that your father is coming across now serious dementia.
Yes.
And how do you face it as an artist? Because what I found, I'm also a photographer, is that it changed quite a lot when you go to another community, even if you are very empathetic.
Yeah.
And when it comes to really close people, it's like,
it's harder.
Yeah.
Much
It's harder.
harder.
So I would like to know about this.
I've been thinking
if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. I've been thinking for a very long time about how to work with him, and I'll tell you a secret. I know it's being recorded. My father was an agent for national intelligence, so he had this phenomenal life, but it was a big secret. He never spoke about it. We were never allowed to ask about it. So he had this incredibly private life, and I think because of that, I feel an even deeper sense of urgency to find a way to remember these things for him, but also for me. I think we're so similar, and I think I got a lot of darkness from him as well, but we share so much, and I must be honest, it's been such a difficult thing to figure out how to do it that I keep delaying the start, but I know that it's something I need to do for myself, and I think for him to feel like his story matters and that's seen. Yeah. Does that help? Okay.
¿Son todos tus proyectos relacionados, empiezan siempre desde un punto de vista personal, sobre una experiencia personal, o partes desde una crítica social, algo que quieras contar al mundo de forma positiva?
I always feel like stories find me in a way, but then looking back, there's always a very deep personal connection. So it's a bit of both, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
porque tienes algo de ir a buscar la historia y que la historia te encuentre a ti a la vez, cuando explicas que le das la vuelta a cómo representar The Big Forget, el Gran Olvido, ¿no? Desde una parte positiva. ¿Cuesta mucho encontrar estas historias positivas, darle el giro, no quedarte solo en lo trágico, en lo doloroso, en lo que has dicho, no llega a contarlo desde ese lado?
I think, we have so many stories from Africa where we see the negative and we see people portrayed as victims, and I hate that. I hate that people are shown as weak and needing help, because what I've seen is that the continent is rich with ingenuity and this incredible strength, and I think that's why I always gravitate towards a solution-based angle, even though my work always focuses on very difficult social issues. That's always what I look for. I think it's so important to show people as the heroes of their own stories, as I've said.
Y en este giro de representación, tú que eres miembro del colectivo Natif, que sois un conjunto de reporteros procedentes de comunidades no representadas, yo me pregunto, ¿qué estrategias seguís para que vuestros proyectos ganen visibilidad? Ahora nos has dicho una, ¿no? Como mostrar otra cara de África, que no es la clásica que tenemos aquí, que es el desastre. ¿Piensas que hay estrategias realmente que sirven como para que este conjunto de fotógrafos se vean más vuestros reportajes, lleguen más al mundo en general?
I think it remains a massive challenge. I know so many incredible storytellers that are telling such important stories, and there's definitely a genuine interest in that, but I think that we as storytellers drive pushing those stories out and getting that support, getting spaces where those stories can exist, but it's definitely not easy.
¿Qué le dirías a alguien? Es una clásica pregunta que hago, pero a alguien que empieza desde aquí o desde allá. ¿Qué le dirías a alguien que quiere empezar a fotografiar esta parte del mundo, a contar estas historias del mundo que todavía no están contadas?
Photograph what you love. I think the way you see the world is your superpower, and it's going to set you apart from everybody else. It's your unique perspective. Honor that. Find people who build a community, build a visual community, and don't try and make your work look like what you see. I remember when I got my first assignment for National Geographic, I went through all the National Geographics and I was like, shit, how do I shoot like this? And then I realized they don't want that. They want me. And I'm just going to stick to that. So, really honor the way you see, because everything that makes you, your family, the way you grew up, it's something special. It's the way you see that makes you a good photographer.
No sé si tenéis alguna pregunta más. Mira, por ahí hay uno.
I see.
Hello, can you hear me? Really beautiful photography, thank you. It seems that, I'm just curious, because it seems that you have such a connection with your subjects. I don't know if you can explain kind of what it was like. How do you communicate with them? Because they seem to open up with you and show you their world.
That's a great question. Thank you. I always say, like, once you've shared a meal with somebody, there's something so incredibly intimate and simple about that. So for me, that's always the first step. Always to find a way to put the camera away and just to share a meal, to have food. Today I had lunch with you and Carlos, and to me, it's such a sacred moment. And from there, you build a foundation. You spend time. You go early in the morning. You sleep over if you can. I think I'm such an extreme introvert that this fact that somebody's giving me this access and opening the door is such a phenomenal feeling. I love that. So I absolutely embrace that. And for me, it's such an incredible way to interact with people and the world. Yeah, if you open the door, I'll come and I'll just stay, so you'll see. It's really fun.
Otra pregunta por aquí.
Hello, Lee-Ann. Thank you for your work. It's really beautiful. I have a question regarding the process. Let's say, like, photography, like, requires technical expertise that is you need to reach at some point. Like, there's a minimum technical expertise you need to get to. But this goes a little bit beyond just a picture, right? Like, you've been talking about storytelling. So I want to ask you if you think that, let's say, in any job you need to increase your technical expertise or your expertise in general. Do you think like you are now in a point in which you can just focus on storytelling, or there are situations in which you want to tell a story but you feel like you don't have the technical expertise to tell it in the way you want?
I think, of course, both are important, but I think for me the most important thing is the way people feel around you. So for me, that's always the starting point. I think the longer I do this, the more I develop the skills to tell the stories visually. I'm very fortunate. I'm a bit of an accidental photographer where when I was around 28, my previous partner said, we were planning a holiday to Indonesia, and he said, let's buy a camera. And I said, what a terrible idea. It's such a waste of money. And he bought it, and I was furious. I said, how could you spend all this money on a camera? Anyway, I picked it up, and I never put it down. And so when I turned 30, I decided that I wanted to be a photographer, but I couldn't afford to go and study photography. So I decided to assist commercial photographers to learn about photography and to generate income. But I always knew I never wanted to do that kind of photography. That was never me. But what was really incredible was I was learning about how to light a bottle or how to work with a model. And it made me think about, what do you want to say with an image? And so I took all of these technical skills, and I'm not very technical at all, but I took them and I applied them to documentary storytelling, and I realized that I didn't want to just arrive on a scene and document what I saw. I wanted to create an image. I wanted to make an image, not just take it, and I wanted to make it with the people that I'm photographing. So yes, I think both are important, but I always think the human aspect, for me, is key.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No sé si tenéis alguna pregunta más. Que aquí con la luz casi no se os ve, pero... ¿no? It's like shiny. ¿No? Yo quería preguntarte también, al trabajar en un proyecto de largo plazo, ¿cómo consigues la financiación y también la edición de todo este? Imagino que son miles de imágenes que creas, ¿no? ¿Te ayuda alguien? Sé que publicaste en The Spiegel, pero ¿cómo lo haces para 3 años trabajando un tema, para mantener todo esto y para editar? Porque estás muy cerca de las historias que explicas a nivel emocional. Entonces, ¿cómo lo haces esto?
So I think for all storytellers, this is the biggest challenge. With this particular project, I was very lucky to receive 2 grants, and then to also receive 3 assignments. The assignments help, but they're never enough for me. I think editors hate working with me because they always want to give me 3 days, 5 days, and I want so much time, you know, and the magazines can't afford that. So, you know, I always make a deal with them where I say, well, get me there and pay me for some days, but then I'll stay until I feel I'm done. And that works very well for me. But, you know, I think when you start a project, nobody believes in it but you. Nobody's interested in it but you. So often I will start by funding the work, the first step, and then I have something small to show, and then I'll get interest from magazines or from grant applications, and so you just keep building. And yeah, it's always hard.
¿Y qué pasa con la edición? ¿Cómo te lo haces para ir editando, para distanciarte del proyecto?
I'm the worst editor. I think photographers shouldn't be editors of their own work. You're too close to it, and you love certain moments that make it special for you. So for this project, I was very lucky. was awarded a grant by the Bob and Diane Fund. They specifically fund work on dementia. And with that came a year-long mentorship with Sarah Lee-Ann, who was the previous head of photography at National Geographic, and she became a friend. And she's played a major part in helping me develop this work, in being patient with me, and just dropping thousands of images in her lap. And she just has this incredible eye, and she's just this wonderful human. So my advice to other photographers would also be either get other photographers to help you work on your edits. I often do that with friends when I develop new projects. Or get people, build a community that you can ask for help. It's so important. And
Friends, amigos, ¿no?
Yeah, I have photo friends everywhere.
Conocemos otros proyectos tuyos como el Black Track Magic, The Dance, que es un proyecto que celebra el fin de los estudios, estudiantes sudafricanos. Cuando piensas en un proyecto, cuando piensas en una comunidad, ¿piensas en una estrategia para acercarte a ellos? Te lo digo porque cuando nosotras trabajamos con comunidades distintas, hemos trabajado con personas que tienen enfermedades mentales, están en residencias, tenemos que cambiar muy claras las estrategias de trabajo. Por ejemplo, una persona que vive en una residencia aquí en Barcelona tiene un problema de estigmatización, sale a la calle y todo el mundo sabe que es el loco que está saliendo de paseo. ¿Cómo rompemos esto? Es una estrategia, ¿no? Entonces montamos y hacemos que hayan retratos entre las personas que están en la residencia y los vecinos de la calle, y así rompemos estigma. Pero cuando trabajamos con personas que sufren abusos sexuales en la infancia, lo que estamos rompiendo es un silencio. Más que un estigma, estamos hablando de tabú. Y allí no nos sirve la misma estrategia. Tenemos que cambiar y pensar en que tenemos que dejar a las personas hablar en primera persona y que cuenten sus historias. Y es ahí donde, cuando viene la gente y hacemos actividades, les impacta. Conocen la historia, ¡pam!, rompen un tabú también. ¿Cómo te lo planteas tú al trabajar con distintos proyectos, con distintas comunidades, con distintas personas? ¿Cambias tu acercamiento al tema, a la forma de fotografiar, al modo como armar tu proyecto?
Absolutely. When I start a project, it's always a foundation, but I know that the first few times working on it, that's never going to be the project. That never makes the edit, because I have no clue what I'm doing at that particular moment. Yeah. You know, I'm really just starting. So the strategy always evolves. It's always changing. When you talk about the dance, it's... if I have a moment, I'll tell you quickly. So the dance is a project about matric dances. It's like a prom. I don't know if you have something similar when you finish high school. But that was never the project I was going to do. I was working on a project about gang violence. And what happened was that I was working in these different areas. So every area had their own gang leader. And I would have to go and ask for permission so that I could be safe to do the work. And I met one of the leaders, and he said to me, well, it's my son's school dance, and if you photograph him, you're a photographer, can you give us the pictures? Then you'll be safe. And I did it. but it was a way to get access. And then a few months later, I thought, that was incredible. It was like in the, I think you say favela? Yeah, and the girls were wearing these ball gowns like Disney princesses, and they would bring out a red carpet and hire these fancy sport cars. And I was just blown away at how this community was celebrating this student finishing high school. And then I learned that this was probably the first family member to ever finish high school in this family. But that wasn't what I was doing initially. It was kind of a happy accident. And that's often the case, is that you need to be open, because the story again will find you. Yeah.
Está abierta a las historias que te trae la vida, ¿no? Lee-Ann, ¿cuál es la siguiente historia que qué proyecto tienes en mente ahora para realizar en un futuro?
So The Big Forget is an ongoing project that I'll continue working on for many years. I'll continue in Africa, but I'd also like to work with other communities in Central Asia, in South America, where the stigma and the belief in the spiritual is very similar. And then I'm also doing a project on girls' education and child marriage. I did the first chapter in Kenya, and I have a few more schools in Nigeria and Malawi and Ethiopia that I'd love to work with. So just to keep going with these two. Yeah.
Seguir. No sé si tenéis alguna pregunta en la recámara. Aquí hay una, mira.
Yeah.
A ver el micro.
It's coming. She's here.
Hola, muchas gracias por la exposición.
Hey.
Ha sido muy interesante escuchar tu experiencia con la fotografía y las comunidades. Yo lo que te quería preguntar es qué pasa cuando inicias un proyecto, escoges una comunidad y hay un rechazo por parte de la comunidad. Es decir, te pueden considerar a ti y a tu equipo como unos intrusos que vais a sacar una información y que no tienen muy claro para qué se va a utilizar o si se va a manipular, etc. Entonces, ¿cómo gestionáis estas situaciones que supongo que en algún momento te has podido encontrar?
This is a brilliant question. So,
Gracias.
I've had a lot of experiences where you arrive in a community and, of course, people don't know who you are, why you're there, what you're going to do. And especially with the camps, for instance, there has been a couple of journalists who have come and gone. So for me, consistency is very important, to show up repeatedly, because if somebody's going to share their story with you, you're going to have to show some commitment. So I think I get a lot of moments where people are not sure whether to let me in, and I keep going back and I give them an opportunity to get to know me and to decide. And of course, if it's still no, then that's okay. Never force it. I think that's so important. I remember photographing the matric dancers, and there was another journalist, and this girl came out and she looked so beautiful, and he said to me, "Why are you not photographing her? This is the moment." And I said, "No, this is not my moment. This is her family's moment with their cell phones. My moment will come, but it's not right now." So it's also important to know, when to step back, but to show commitment. How can I expect somebody to trust me with their trauma or with the intimate moments of their life? The way I always think about it is, how would I feel if I arrived at my mom and dad's house and there was somebody who just walked in the door and started photographing them? I'd be furious, And I treat it the same. I often see photographers who would maybe walk in an informal settlement and they would photograph children, where in an affluent neighborhood where rich people live, you would never do that. You'd be scared. So why is it any different in a poorer community? Consent is the same across the board. So I think that's very important. Just because you have a camera doesn't give you the right to use it. Okay.
Es también el tiempo que le dedicas a los proyectos, ¿no? El volver a los lugares, que confíen en ti, insistir, ¿no? Supongo que no queda ninguna pregunta. Hay una por aquí, ya está. Vamos cerrando el acto. Es un inmenso placer tenerte aquí, Lee-Ann. No tenemos más tiempo. Me sabe mal. Antes de cerrar, yo quería recordaros que la exposición WordPress Foto está en el Centro de la Cultura Contemporánea de Barcelona hasta el 17 de diciembre, que el lunes 11 tenemos una mesa redonda, el lunes 11 de diciembre a las 7 de la tarde. Se llama el fotoperiodismo en conflictos armados cuando la información es un arma de guerra. Os invitamos a venir a todos y todas. Justo ayer colgamos nuestro documental Material Sensible en Filming. Os invitamos a verlo, sobre este proyecto de abusos sexuales en la infancia. Lee-Ann, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Nos das confianza, nos das la creencia de que la transformación es posible siempre desde este cambio, desde este cuidado y desde esta sensibilidad que nos has transmitido hoy. Muchísimas gracias por tu tiempo, por estar aquí y por tu proyecto.
Gracias.